Hello, my name is Shirgi, and in this video, I'll be showing you how I orchestrated what I like to call a very pillowy sound. Something very soft and fluffy. One of my own criticisms to myself for this piece, as I was orchestrating it, is that it felt way too grand. It didn't feel so childlike and dreamy. It felt a little bit too regal, too pomp and circumstance. I needed it to be more imaginative and more cellophane. This melody is taken from an old project of mine called Homesick, which I have been trying to revise and re-revise and re-revise over and over again because I just am never satisfied with it. It has never been in a place that I really like it. With all that being said, I am quite proud of this orchestration, so I will play it for you, and then I hope that you enjoy it, so then you'll listen to me discuss the nitty-gritty of how I accomplished this. Let's talk about how I accomplished that sound. The first thing that I did is to shift the melody between different instruments, and not just have one phrase be played by some instruments, another phrase be played by other instruments, or even have a melody counter melody in two different instruments. By this I mean the melody is constantly weaving between groups of the orchestra. So here in the beginning, I have the flutes play the melody, then the oboes, and then all the way down here to the strings, and then all the way up here to the clarinets, all within the span of 6 bars. So the melody starts in the flutes. And then very abruptly the flutes end, but they are carried on by the oboes. And then after the oboes play, the strings play. And then immediately the strings are gone, and they are overtaken by the clarinets. And at this point, I wanted this cadence to be very dramatic. I decided to have both the clarinets and the violins play this soaring melody. You can always count on violins plus clarinets to be a very sweet and smooth, lovely combo, perfect for your romantic sounding melodies. Not only is the melody shifting between instruments, but so is the accompaniment. The most interesting part of the accompaniment are these arpeggios that keep moving throughout the piece, up and down and up and down. First they start in the strings and the cellos and the violas. Nothing too particularly complicated, they're just kind of outlining the skeleton of the harmony. But these arpeggios don't just stay in the cellos and the violas. I also have them move to other instruments like the celesta here. As well as the bassoons. And more so the clarinets. So, just like in the melody, the accompaniment, these arpeggios, are also shifting between groups of the orchestra. It feels like you're soaring through the clouds in a very almost turbulent kind of way. If you had this in a more rigidly orchestrated way with the melody and just one kind of instrument, accompaniment, and a bunch of other instruments, then you would have a more straightforward sound, which that straightforwardness then leads to a feeling of formality and regalness in this case because of the very big chords that I have. I also have a lot of parts here that aren't really arpeggios. They're more like just broken intervals, switching between two different notes, also kind of outlining the harmony like the arpeggios are doing, but in a much simpler way. So here, for example, I have bassoon and horn just kind of dotting out some harmony very, very gently. I do the same thing over here with some flutes. I wouldn't say that these kinds of orchestral textures are necessary. They just add a little bit of thickness to the sound. You could also achieve the same thing with some straight chords, some straight sustained chords. I just think that these like hypnotic-esque patterns are a bit more interesting than that. I would suggest here, if you're writing for a big orchestra like this and you want a very well-balanced and very full sound, dedicate one or two instrument groups for the denser harmony. So in this case, I chose to have the brass play the dense harmony. You can hear the entire triad of these chords, the root, the third, and the fifth. And once I've decided which instrument group is going to be playing that dense harmony, all the other instrument groups will play just the fundamental notes, as I like to call them. And usually these are just the bass notes. So here in the strings, at the same time as those brass chords, I just have these guys, violas, cellos, and double basses playing the bass notes. By having one instrument group play just the bass notes, but having another instrument group play the full chord, in this way you still achieve that full orchestral texture, but you don't make it way too dense and way too thick, way too muddy. I hesitate to say that orchestrating chords extremely densely Mahler style is like in any way incorrect or even bad practice, because of course I just name dropped Mahler there. He wrote chords like that extensively. If I wanted to score a very big, grand, almost heavenly sounding chord, then I would score like that very densely, where all of the instrument groups play the notes of the chord. That's not the sound that I wanted for this though, so I didn't write it that way. Alternatively, you can also have the strings play the full chord of the triad, so like the root, third, and fifth, and then you can also just have these brass guys play those bass notes. Or you can have the woodwinds play the full chords and have the brass and the strings play the bass notes. Each of those decisions will impact the way your chord sounds and the texture of it. As much as it might sound helpful for me to go through and try every instrument pairing and then report back on what I think of them, I don't think it's very useful practically for me to just explain it to you and lecture you about what it sounds like. I think you should just try it on your own. It should come as no surprise that the celesta playing these very pretty runs and arpeggios is just the name of the game for this kind of texture. Let's listen to the celesta isolated. What a beautiful instruments. I'll probably have a celesta in every single orchestral piece I write because it's just so awesome. I think at least in an orchestral setting, the celesta will most likely have a sustain pedal, but I'm aware that some celestas don't actually come with a sustain pedal, which is just, I think it's just silly because a celesta without a sustain pedal is like an angel without wings. Just listen to how amazing it sounds with a sustain. Now, this part here gets very, very busy. This climax, I guess you could call it, of this phrase. A challenge that I had when orchestrating and reorchestrating and re-reorchestrating this piece is that there are technically 4 melodies happening here. There's a melody playing in the violins. There's an imitation of that in the violas and the cellos. There's an imitation of that in the trombones. And yet again, another counter melody, this time in the trumpets. First of all, I just wanted this principal melody to be played by the violins. There's not really a long backstory to that. It just felt like a violin melody to me, so I followed that instinct. Violins 1 and 2, playing in octaves, because the violins, compared to the brass instruments especially, they're not super duper loud. Like, you can hear them, but of course, even an entire section of violins can be easily outplayed by a tuba or a trombone. To kind of make the violins seem a lot louder than they are, first of all, I do have triple F playing here, which is, I think, a bold choice, and I'm not super sure about it even after writing it, but of course an easy peasy trick to make the violins seem a bit louder than they are is to have them play in octaves. Or if you like, you can also have both the first and second violins play in unison, which means that they're playing the same notes, and then you can put the viola an octave lower. That kind of scoring would achieve similar effect. The melody would just be even louder, but in this case, I already had the violas paired with the cellos, so I just had the first and second violins just play a lot louder with that triple F. I also scored for some flutes, so the flutes are also belting out that high end with the violins, just to really reinforce that fluffy, fluffy high sound. Because I have 4 melodies playing here at once, it became almost an impossible task to balance 4 melodies being played by an entire darn orchestra, and then the harmony below them. I think that was just a task that either I'm not expert enough in orchestrating to do, or was just impossible to do in a way that satisfied me. After some thinking, I settled on the idea that it is better to let the main principal melody shine above everyone else, even covering over the counterpoint a little bit, than it is to sacrifice the prominence of the main melody just so you can hear your masterful writing of your counter melodies. By elevating the counter melodies at the sacrifice of the prominence of your main melody, it makes the music sound less clear, and it makes it less easy to discern what your musical intention is. But the idea is that your main melody should be able to shine above all the other stuff that's happening in your music. The melody is the important part. The accompaniment is there to support the melody. The accompaniment is not there to overtake the melody. I would go as far as to say that always you want the main melody to shine over everyone else. And the main melody can change. The main melody can be in the treble, sometimes it can be in the tenor, sometimes in the alto, sometimes in the bass. It can change. But no matter what, it should be shining over everyone else. As an example, I've removed that crescendo to triple F that the violins are playing. I've also muted the flutes, which were just supporting the violins, so I've decreased the prominence of the main melody. And I've also boosted the prominence of the counter melodies, so now the trumpets and the trombones are both playing fortissimo. I hope you can hear that by doing this, elevating the counter melodies and sacrificing the prominence of the main melody, the music will sound a little bit more confused as to what its musical intent is, and it won't have as much impact emotionally, at least in my opinion. So that will be all for my little commentary on how to orchestrate this very soft and pillowy texture. I do hope you learned something, and I hope that you enjoyed listening to my music. Please subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions for me, then feel free to ask in the comments, and I will see you guys later. Bye bye!